Hi Begbrook. Today's story is a little bit longer than usual because the chapter is longer than what we usually read. Don't feel like you need to watch it all today because I won't be posting any videos of our 3 o'clock reads during the Easter holidays. So you can always come back to this at any point during the Easter, and I'll finish it off after the Easter holidays so that you won't miss anything during those 2 weeks. I hope you enjoy it. The monkeys and the bees. Jungles, Fred found, were full of corners and crannies. So that's like lots of little small places. They held secrets. But the secrets emerged in the most unexpected ways. They would never, he thought, have found the scrap of paper that changed everything if it hadn't been for the joint efforts of the monkeys and the ants and the bees. So they found some paper. Wonder what it says on it. Max saw them first later that afternoon. He'd been lying on his back, staring at the sky, while Leela and Con and Fred sat by the fire and tried to make a plan. The problem was, despite being told very firmly to stay put, Max kept trying to explore, and he was a small 5-year-old in a very large jungle. "How sure are you that the raft will hold?" Leela asked. Fred considered. The raft was wide and strong, and the vines were wrapped so thickly to secure it that the raft was more green than brown. It looked like a rectangle of floating cricket pitch, but he thought the pilot had presumably been just as certain about the plane. "Medium sure." He saw Con's face. "Hi, Medium. And walking would take weeks," he said. "We know Manaus is on the Amazon, so if we sail down the river, we should reach it." Max approached and sat on Leela's feet, tugging at her sock. "Leela!" He dug a chunk of snot from his nose and wiped it on the grass. "Yuck." "Except we don't know if Manaus is upriver or downriver from here," said Con. "So we have a 50% chance of death." "Leela," said Max, "listen to me." "But there's a 50% chance of life," said Fred. Con smirked, and he resisted the urge to flick Max's snot at her. "Can you hear yourself?" she said. "Do you know how insane that sounds?" "Leela!" Max tugged harder at her sock. Did you see how the monkeys fought the bees?" "What do you mean?" asked Leela. Bacca had taken up a position draped across one of her shoulders, back legs hooked under her armpit. He looked, Fred thought, like the epaulettes on his father's old army uniform. "The monkeys won," said Max. "I followed them." "Max, what are you talking about?" Leela picked him up and held his face close to hers, blazingly angry. "I thought you were in the den. You know you're not allowed to move. I told you. If I can't trust you, I'm going to tie you to me." Max pouted. "I didn't go far. I stayed away because I don't like bees." "Maxie, don't lie. There are no bees," said Leela. "I've seen every flying thing, ants and beetles and mosquitoes, but no bees." "It was over there," said Max. He pointed to the other side of the clearing among 2 rubber trees. "In the high bits." Leela raised her eyebrows over Max's head. "Was this a dream, Max, or in real life?" "Real life," said Max. "I don't believe you." "Real life!" Max looked furious. "Real life! The monkeys washed their hands in the ants, and then they fought the bees." "I've no idea what you're trying to describe," said Con, "but it sounds terrifying." Max got up, roared and stamped, accidentally stepping on Con's knuckles. Con gave a yell and slapped at his ankles. "That hurt," she said. "Don't hit him," said Leela. "You're not paying attention, any of you," said Max. "Listen!" Do you think Max is making it up, or do you think he's telling the truth? I'm thinking that he might be telling the truth, because he was the one that found the sloth, and nobody seemed to believe him then. Why do you think they might not believe him? Fred looked at Max. The boy's eyes were unhappy and a little wild. "We are listening, Max," he said. "No! Come! Max took hold of Con's hand and pulled her up and towards the trees, his small feet thumping determinedly into the earth. I've paused again because it said his feet were thumping determinedly on the earth. Can you thump your feet determinedly on the floor? Con looked surprised, but let herself be led, jogging beside him. She didn't comment on the state of Max's hand, which was sticky with unknown substances. Fred and Leela ran after them. There, said Max. They were there. He pointed up at an ant nest, a great bulbous structure built on the tree's trunk, bulging out of it like a pot belly. There were no monkeys in sight. They were here really soon ago, said Max. They'll come back. Sceptically, Fred sat down. Max sat on Leela's legs. Bacca clung to Leela's shirt. Sitting still and empty-handed was not, Fred found, an easy thing to do. The things he was trying so hard not to think about, his father's face, his mother's voice, came crowding in, and darker things, the picture of all four of them starving, unfound, in the green clearing, crept towards him. He tried to whistle, but his head swam, and he succeeded only in making a peculiar piping noise. Fred, whispered Leela, you'll scare the monkeys. And then suddenly the monkeys came. There were 3 of them, dark brown and strong-limbed and sweet-faced. Fred watched in awe as they chased one another up and down the trees, chittering. They whirligigged. Oh, that's a funny word. Whirligigged. Whirling means twirling, like you're spinning around. Whirligigged. What do you think that word means? I'm going to read the sentence to help me find out. They whirligigged around the trees, flicking their tails. I wonder if it means climbing up the trees, but in a big spiral. And then the largest of the monkeys, a mother with a baby hanging from her neck, laid her paws on the ant nest. The ants swarmed over the monkey's paws and up her arms until her fur was black with them. Then fast, before the ants could bite, the monkey rubbed her paws together. Con touched Fred's sleeve. Is she killing the ants? Fred watched the monkey lower her nose to her paws and sniffed deeply. Is it like a perfume? He said. Suddenly, all 3 monkeys, as if at a signal, turned and leapt away across the trees. Let's follow them, said Leela. It isn't easy to keep pace with monkeys if you don't happen to be one yourself, and if you haven't eaten properly for days. They were all 4 weak, and Leela's hands were shaking. Con turned pale as they jogged after the monkeys' disappearing backs. The monkeys leapt into the branches of the great spreading rubber trees and halted, which means they stopped. Bees, said Max in a self-satisfied voice. I told you. Far above their heads, so far it was blurred with distance, was a beehive. It was enormous, encased in a grey layer of resin, and the buzzing was astonishingly loud. Okay, what I want you to do now is, can you pretend that you're in the buzzing beehive? Think about how loud it's going to be. Practice doing some buzzing now. Honey ran down the side of the tree. Leela's eyes widened. She held Bacca more tightly. They don't attack sloths, do they? As they watched, the mother monkey approached the hive, broke open the protective layer, and plunged her paws into its depths. She broke off a piece of honeycomb and bit into it, dripping honey on her baby's head. The bees swarmed furiously, but didn't go close enough to sting. Leela's eyes were as wide as the sun. I think the smell on her paws meant that the bees didn't attack, she said. It must be a repellent. Let's try it, said Fred, already on his feet. But what if it only works for monkeys, said Con. Well, there's only one way to find out. He thought of dinner, which would be pineapples, if there were any left, and cocoa grubs, if there weren't. Wouldn't you like some honey? Just think, for a minute, before you... But Fred was already running. He wound his way back to the ant's nest and waited, panting for the others to catch up. Then he laid his hands on its side. The ants swarmed onto his fingers and knuckles and wrists. It was like wearing a pair of black gloves. I think at this part of the story I actually agree with Con. I'm not sure I would be wanting to go and see whether putting ants all over my hands was going to stop me getting stung from a bee. What would you do? They tickle, he said. The ants were so small it was like being covered in full stops. Now you rub your hands, ordered Max. Quick! Quickly! Like the monkeys! A few of the ants swarmed up Fred's arms all the way to his chin, but they didn't seem disposed to bite. He rubbed his hands together, feeling a little guilty, and then sniffed. The smell was so strong that he gagged, which means he was nearly sick. You know when they put stuff on cuts at school, he said. It's like that. Disinfectant, said Leela. He rubbed his hands over his face, as he'd seen the monkey do, and up his arms. He hesitated, and then gathered more ants and rubbed the smell onto his legs and ankles too, just in case. Con pulled his hand down to her face so she could sniff. It smells like ammonia, she said. Like my aunt's smelling salts. They ran back to the honey tree. Fred thought the others seemed to be giving him a wider berth than usual. You smell like a bad idea, said Max. Like medicine. At the foot of the tree, Fred looked up. The trunk was enormous and the bees a distant cloud. Are you sure you don't want to stop to think for just 1 single second, to at least make a plan? Said Con. I'll be fine, said Fred. He'd always loved climbing trees, that feeling of navigating an unknown land upwards. The others watched him, Leela with expectant eyes, Con with one eyebrow and her upper lip raised. Wonder if you can practice that face. Max with his finger in his nose. He seized a low branch and heaved himself up. Max cheered. Fred's legs scrabbled for purchase, and then found a knot in the bark and pushed upwards. He felt immediately that this was different. This was nothing like climbing at home. His muscles were weak and less at his command. His arms and legs had less pull and spring to them. It occurred to him with a jolt that he hadn't checked to see if the tree's wood was rotten. What do you think would happen if the tree's wood was rotten? What might happen to the branches of the tree? Have a little think now. The tree creaked under him, loud as the hinge on a giant's gate. Oh no, he whispered very quietly. He reached up for the next branch, and then the next, his shoes slipping and sliding on the smoothness of the bark. Oh, for goodness sake, he heard Con say. He's going to get himself killed. He'll be all right, said Leela. Really? What if he's not, though? It'll be even harder stuck in this place with just 3 of us. Fred, she called. Please, just come down. Fred ignored her. He swung higher and faster. He set both feet on a thick branch and looked above his head for a good handhold. Suddenly, the branch under his feet snapped. His legs flailed in the air, kicking against the trunk of the tree, and he swung from his hands, feeling his fingers slip against the slick surface. He scrabbled with his right hand for another branch, his legs blindly seeking a foothold. His feet met solid wood again. He tried to pull up to the next handhold, but his arms felt hollow, no more use than wool or straw. He stood on a knot in the trunk, clutching at the branch above his head, frozen. He tried not to think of what his father's face would look like if he heard that his son had died climbing a tree. Look at him, said Con below. He's stuck. You all right? Called Leela. He's obviously not, said Con. I'm not going to stand here and watch him die. She stomped to the base of the tree, her shoulders hunched around her ears, and began to haul herself up, her jaw locked like a boxer's. She moved stiffly but steadily, despite the shaking in her hands and knees. Fred watched as she came to rest a few branches below him, staring up, hugging the trunk to her chest. Her ankles were wobbling with fear. What are you doing? He asked through gritted teeth. Telling you to come down. No, said Fred. I'm going up. Then I'm coming too. Why? You look stuck. I'm not. But he knew it wasn't true. He had no feeling in his arms. He looked down at Con. Her face was bloodless, so white it was almost blue. How do you think she's feeling? I think she's probably feeling quite nervous. I'd be really scared climbing a tree. How would you feel? But her face was full of determination, which means that she wants to do it. She's determined to help. He tried to arrange his expression into easy curiosity. Even if I were, how would you be able to help? I'll go ahead, she said, and test the branches. If you have another scare like that, I bet you'd just fall and die. I wasn't scared, said Fred. The words were out of his mouth before he could stop them. Yes, you were, said Con, facing up the tree. And so am I. So, there. She moved ahead. She went far more slowly than he would have, and her face was set with an expression that looked like fury. But she climbed steadily, testing each branch with her feet and wiping her hands on her skirt at every move. Fred unpeeled one hand from the branch. He pushed back at the angry opera of fear. He followed Con. Gradually, as Fred climbed, the sway and rhythm of it took over, and his breathing returned to normal. The hive came into sight. There were hundreds, perhaps thousands of buzzing insects. Bees don't have encouraging faces, do they? Said Con. Her voice was much higher than usual. Do it quickly, so we can go down. Just a second. Fred crouched on the branch, his legs shaking a little, and stuffed leaves into his nostrils, so the bees couldn't sting up his nose. Don't come too close, or you'll get stung. From far below he heard Leela call encouragingly, You can do it! Max unencouragingly shouted, But also, if you both fall, would you be angry if we ate you? Fred stood, wrapping one arm around a thick branch to the right of him. With the other he reached up and left, out over the vast drop, and pushed his hand into the fist-sized hole in the beehive that the monkey had made. The buzzing grew louder and more furious. Fred braced himself. The bees swarmed angrily around him, and a few rebounded off his shorts, but not a single bee touched his skin.
I wonder who can use their pearl power now to make a link. Why did none of the bees try to sting Fred? What happened earlier on in the story? That's right. He'd covered himself in all of the ants, and it acted as a repellent. The bees didn't like the smell, so they didn't sting him.
Triumphantly, he broke off a fistful of honeycomb and then another. It works, Fred said. A bee buzzed into his mouth. He swore and spat it out, bleh, jerking his head, and felt the tree sway under him. Where do we put it? Asked Con. We could drop the chunks of honeycomb down to Leela, Fred said, but they might get stuck in the leaves. If all of this was for nothing, Con began. No, I've got an idea. He braced himself and looped one arm around a branch. With his free hand he tucked his shirt into his shorts, then dropped the honey inside his shirt front. He licked his fingers. Ah, he said. He'd forgotten that they were covered in dust from the bark, and the remaining parts of the ants. But even so, the honey was spectacular, made his skin buzz. Can I have some? Asked Con. Thought you wanted to get down. She was shaking so hard her knees were jumping, but she lifted her chin defiantly. If you can, I can. It was just as Fred edged around the great trunk of the tree towards her that he saw it, something red, the size of an apple, tied tightly with vines to the branch. What do you think it could be? I'm having a little think too. Something red, the size of an apple, tied tightly with vines to the branch. His breath stopped. He leant backwards to see better. Fred, said Con. Don't! I'm fine. He grabbed a handful of the tree branch. Look above your head. The red thing wasn't a plant. It didn't have the tinge of life to it. What is it? She squinted upwards. The leaves are in the way. I think it's leather. Like a handbag? No. something else. He edged round her and upwards. He unwound the thing from the tree as quickly as he could, his hands shaking. The branch he was on was broad, and he sat down on it, his legs hanging on either side. Con approached him and sat facing him, hugging the trunk with one shaking arm. "Don't open it now," she said. "Wait until we're on the ground, you idiot." "Just quickly," said Fred. It was a red leather pouch with a leather drawstring and the remnants of gold embossed writing on the base. It was heavy. His hands were shaking as he opened it and pulled out a lump of metal. "A tobacco tin," he said. It was rusty, but less rusty than the sardine can. "Let me see," said Con. There were words on the side. She whispered them aloud as if they were a spell. "Collier's Finest Tobacco, London, Piccadilly." "There's something else," he said. The tree rocked suddenly in the wind, and the thing slipped through his fingers. He caught it just in time. It was also rusty and rough in his fingers. "A penknife," he said. "Is that everything?" "I think so." So far in their journey, they found a sardine can, a tobacco tin, and a penknife. All of those things would belong to a human. Do you think someone's been there before them? If you do, who do you think it was that was there? He brushed away a stray bee and upturned the pouch over his palm. A piece of paper fell out. This must be the piece of paper he was talking about earlier in the chapter. "What's that?" said Con. "A letter?" It was a sheet of paper from the blank end pages of a book, marked in ink and labelled with neat block capitals. In the corner was a sketch of the points of a compass. When we were geographers, we looked at pieces of paper that had compasses on them. What do you think it could be? Have a little think now. "It's a map," he said. Goosebumps rose on his arms. Fred knew the power of maps. They gestured to hidden things. They were line drawings of the world's secrets. He studied it. It was sketched in ink, which had faded in the creases of the paper. There were thin lines for tributaries and a thick one for what he assumed must be the Amazon. In the far right-hand corner, there was an X. It had been scratched so fiercely the pen had pierced the paper. Well, usually they say that X marks the spot. Do you think there might be treasure under the X? What do you think it's of? What's the X stand for? Con's eyes were wide. She seemed to have forgotten they were 30 metres up in the sky. "I don't know." Fred looked upwards. The tree they were sitting in was taller than the others surrounding it. Near the top, where it thinned to a spike, it stood high above most of the rest of the canopy. "I'm going further up," he said. "If I can get above the canopy, I might be able to see." "No, you're not. That would be insane. You're just showing off because you're embarrassed you got scared before." Fred felt his ears grow red, probably because he was a little bit frightened. "I'm going. Do you want to go back down or come with me?" Con pulled the corners of her mouth towards her chin. "I'm coming too, obviously." They went slowly, testing each branch as they got thinner and thinner. The branches became springy and fork-handle thin. Suddenly, Fred's head broke out from under a leafy branch, and he found himself head and shoulders above the canopy. Below him, the river stretched purple and silver. Fred tried to keep his breathing steady. It was exactly as he'd dreamt it, from his seat on the floor in a corner of the library. "Look," he said. "I am looking," said Con. She was just below him. Her eyes were screwed shut. The river wound for miles around bends and swoops, disappearing into the horizon near the foot of a mountain. As he watched, a monkey skittered down from a tree and leapt away, curling its tail around branches as it swung past him. "Open your eyes, Con," said Fred. "You have to see." Con opened her eyes and then opened them further, as wide as the sky. "I didn't know. It's, bite your fist, beautiful." It looked, Fred thought, like someone had designed it with a purpose in mind, someone who wanted the world to be as wild and green and alive as possible. Very slowly he let go of the tree with one hand. Fear rose up in his mouth, but he reached into his pocket. He unfolded the paper. It felt like a small green miracle. The map matched exactly what he saw. It might almost have been drawn from precisely this position, or one very close. He peered down at the map. "That's us," he whispered. "And that bend, that's the place where we moored," said Con. There were ink curves intricately sketched that matched exactly, or almost exactly, the world below them. "Where's the X?" asked Con. Fred shielded his eyes. "That way, but I can't see anything." The horizon was a green smudge. He couldn't see where the river wound. "We should mark where we are, on the map," said Con. You are here." Fred looked down at his hands. The cuts on his knuckles from the crash were just beginning to heal. He bit the scab off one of them, squeezed out a drop of blood, and put a spot of red on the map to mark where they were. "That's disgusting," said Con. "Good idea." Fred grinned. "Let's go down," he said. "There's honey for lunch." He swung down from the tree faster than he should have. A lot of skin got left on a knot of bark halfway, and he got poked in the eye by a branch. Con followed more slowly, whispering instructions to herself. Honey was seeping through his shirt as he thumped the last 2 feet to the forest floor, but his heart was spinning. "You're alive!" said Max. He threw his arms around Fred's legs and tried to bite his knee in celebration. "We were just thinking we were going to get to eat you." "Try not to sound so disappointed," said Fred, grinning. Con reached the lowest branch of the tree. She hesitated, readying for the jump. Leela held out a hand, but Con ignored it and thumped to the forest floor. "We made a discovery," she said grandly. "Really? What is it? Food?" asked Leela. "Wait and see. Let's get to the clearing first," said Con. Then, as if a valve had been released inside her, she let out a cough that was half laughter and half triumph. "I'd never actually climbed a tree before." "Never?" said Leela. "Then that was actually quite amazing." "I know," said Con. "I think so too." As soon as they reached the den, Fred pulled off his shirt and scraped off the honey in piles on wide leaves. He crossed to the pool and splashed water on his chest and shirt. Bark and dust had stuck to the honey and made a surprisingly interesting paste. "Hurry up, Fred," called Max. Fred gave up and pulled his sticky shirt back on, then ran back to the den. Leela was turning the tobacco pouch over with careful hands. Tobacco was hanging around her throat like a necklace, sniffing her collarbone. "It's red," said Leela. "Tobacco pouches are usually brown." "So?" asked Con. Leela leant forward, her eyes shining. "Bees can't see the colour red. They see it as black. What if someone wanted the bees to protect the pouch from other animals? The bees can't see it's not just part of the tree, so they wouldn't have been suspicious." "Do bees feel suspicious?" said Con sceptically. Leela flushed. "It's just an idea, but Mama says in the jungle you should avoid red. It's a poison colour. Whoever owned this would have counted on that. They must have been planning to come back for it." Fred felt an electric shiver pass over his skin. "There's more. Keep looking." "A map!" Leela unfolded the paper on a wide, flat stone. "Where's the X?" "We couldn't see," said Con. "It was too far." "Maybe treasure," said Leela. "Maybe a secret tribe." "Cannonballs!" said Max. "Don't," said Con. "Or maybe he didn't know what it was." "Maybe it's just where he was going," said Fred. "I wonder if he knew." Max laid one small hand over Fred's mouth. "I'm hungry. Are we going to eat the honey?" The honey worked on them like medicine. Leela sat up straighter. Colour came into Con's cheeks. The taste of the honey was absolutely astonishing, sweet and earthy and wild. It made Fred want to turn backflips across the jungle floor. It was a taste rich enough and deep enough to make them forget, just for half an hour, about the map. If I'd found a map in the Amazon forest, I think I'd be using it to try and get out of the forest and back home. Do you think the same as me? Or do you think something different? What do you think they're going to use the map for? We're going to find out after the Easter holidays.